Imagine a city where people live not beside a gutter, but on it.
Oh.
Not metaphorically, I mean actually, physically floating above sewage.
That's hard to picture.
And it isn't some far-off nightmare. This is happening right now in 2025 in Sadnagar, Govandi, Mumbai.
Right here, right now.
Yeah. So for this deep dive, we're looking at reporting from the India's Got podcast. Their first look at Sadnagar was, well, startling.
It really was.
And what we want to do today is really get under the surface, understand how this community even exists, what daily life is like. I mean, can you imagine living suspended over a sewer?
It's almost unthinkable.
And why does it persist? What do these human stories tell us about a huge city like Mumbai? Think of this as your quick route to understanding a reality that's often just unseen.
Yeah, and what's truly striking, I think, about Sadnagar is it's not just this isolated pocket of poverty. It really shines a harsh light on the extreme outcomes you can get in a major economic hub when, basic housing and governance issues aren't tackled. For anyone listening, understanding Sadnagar, it gives you this powerful lens to look at broader issues. Migration, affordable housing, social equity, things happening in fast-growing cities everywhere, not just India.
Okay, so let's really dig in then. How does a place like this even come to be? I mean, what leads people to end up living on what's essentially a floating pile of refuse?
Well, it really boils down to a combination of things. You've got significant migration into Mumbai, plus the really stark realities of urban poverty that hit people when they arrive.
Right.
We're talking about individuals, families moving from states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Jharkhand, often pushed out by, lack of jobs back home, sometimes environmental changes, or just the hope for something better in the big city.
So people come to Mumbai looking for that opportunity.
Exactly. Just completely out of reach financially.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there are government programs for slum rehab, but the demand, it just massively outstrips the supply. You end up with these incredibly long waiting lists.
So years, potentially.
Decades sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So for many people in that spot, living on this drainage system, it isn't seen as a choice. Not really. It's perceived as the only possible way to get shelter in a city that just offers them nothing else.
Wow.
You might find it hard to believe, but this unbelievably precarious situation, it's often just seen as a necessary step to even exist in Mumbai.
It's just shocking, though, that something so obviously dangerous, so unsanitary, wouldn't just be free, a last resort with no cost. But the podcast highlighted something really disturbing.
Yeah.
Residents are reportedly paying up to 50,000 rupees for a shack on this floating slum. How does that even work?
That really just highlights the kind of exploitative dynamics that take root in these informal settlements, especially where you've got a vacuum of effective governance and regulation.
Okay.
What's really notable here is the reported presence of a local land mafia, essentially. They seem to control these floating platforms.
So they're selling these spots.
They're selling these incredibly dangerous living spaces, basically preying on people's desperation. And that control often stretches to other things provided illegally, like electricity hookups. Residents probably have to pay inflated prices for that too.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, how do these informal power structures get set up and just keep going in a major city?
And there was even talk of protection money being extorted. It sounds like a whole illegal ecosystem is just thriving on this human misery.
It certainly points that way.
So when we talk about these shacks, what are they actually made of? They must be incredibly flimsy.
Oh, absolutely. The construction, it's a testament to people's ingenuity using whatever they can scavenge, but it also just screams vulnerability.
Like what kind of materials?
We're talking makeshift platforms pieced together from discarded stuff, thermocol sheets, scrap wood, old oil drums, rubber inner tubes.
Wow. Stuff nobody else wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Materials obviously not designed for building homes, and definitely not for living long-term over raw sewage. It's crucial to get that these aren't just poor quality homes. They're fundamentally unstable structures in an incredibly hazardous place.
The podcast hosts who actually went there described the ground literally bouncing under their feet.
Wow.
Just imagine that being your everyday reality,
Yeah.
constantly feeling that instability.
That sensation really brings home the insecurity, doesn't it? That inherent risk in their living situation.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that instability gets massively amplified during the monsoon season.
Yeah.
Mumbai gets intense rainfall.
No, definitely.
So the higher water levels, the heavy rain, it makes these platforms even more unstable. There's this constant, very real threat of them just collapsing, sinking. The very ground beneath them is unpredictable, dangerous. It's hard for us to even picture living like that.
They shared a truly heartbreaking story about a woman who drowned when her platform just gave way.
Oh, God.
That's a direct tragic consequence of living like this. It's not just about bad conditions, it's life and death.
That anecdote just powerfully illustrates the human cost of this systemic neglect, doesn't it? It goes beyond discomfort or inconvenience. It reveals the real, immediate dangers to life and safety these residents face every single day. For us, it's vital to recognize these aren't just statistics. They're individual tragedies.
Yeah.
Preventable tragedies, potentially.
And the sanitation situation, or maybe the complete lack of it. No toilets, people having to use precarious wooden beams over the raw sewage. It's almost impossible to really fathom.
But the total absence of basic sanitation, that's a critical piece in understanding the severe health crisis there.
Right.
That direct, constant exposure to untreated human waste creates the perfect breeding ground for just a whole range of diseases. It's vital to grasp that direct link. No sanitation equals a multitude of health problems.
But, amidst all this incredibly harsh reality, the podcast also painted this picture of remarkable resilience. Children still going to school, people trying to earn a living, families just attempting to maintain some sort of normalcy in utterly abnormal circumstances.
That resilience, it really underscores the human spirit's ability to adapt, to persevere, even against the most extreme adversity.
Yeah.
What's particularly noteworthy is how communities do form, how daily life carries on, even if it's incredibly challenging, like the use of solar panels to charge phones they mentioned.
Right, I remember that.
It shows this degree of innovation, adaptation, even when there's zero basic infrastructure provided.
But the health consequences, living in what's essentially raw sewage, they must just be utterly devastating.
Oh, absolutely devastating. The podcast listed off a really concerning catalog of diseases: cholera, dysentery, dengue, malaria, skin infections, respiratory problems, TB.
All the things you'd expect, sadly.
And they're all directly, unequivocally linked to the unsanitary conditions, the lack of clean water. These aren't minor illnesses. They're serious, potentially life-threatening conditions that just thrive in that environment.
And the impact on the children living there? That seemed particularly heartbreaking. This statistic mentioned from a local volunteer nurse: 1 out of every 3 kids underweight or chronically ill. That's just staggering.
It's a truly stark statistic. It highlights the profound, long-lasting, intergenerational impact of poverty and these kinds of living conditions. Children are just so vulnerable to these diseases and chronic malnutrition when they're developing. That can have irreversible consequences.
Yeah.
And beyond the physical stuff, we have to think about the mental health toll. Living under constant stress, in such precarious circumstances, the lack of hope, the daily struggle just for basics. It must take an immense psychological toll on everyone, but especially kids growing up there. It makes you consider the long-term human cost.
And when people in Saithnagar do get sick, where can they even go? The nearest public hospital is reportedly 4 kilometers away.
Which is quite a distance if you're really sick or have no transport.
Exactly. And it's already overcrowded. The podcast even mentioned women giving birth at home on these platforms, surrounded by sewage. That's just horrifying to even contemplate.
This lack of access to adequate health care just compounds the already dire health crisis. Getting emergency help is incredibly difficult. Even routine checkups become a major challenge. And the conditions for childbirth you mentioned, unbelievably unsafe for both mother and baby. It contributes to higher rates of complications, infant mortality. It illustrates a complete breakdown in providing essential public services to this community.
This whole situation really forces the question, doesn't it? Why is this allowed to continue? In a major global city like Mumbai, how can the authorities seemingly just turn a blind eye?
Well, the podcast touched on several factors, all kind of interconnected. First, there's this crucial issue of invisibility.
Invisibility? How so?
Because these settlements are considered illegal encroachments, right? And the residents are often migrants, maybe lacking strong local political ties. They're largely invisible to the formal systems of governance.
But they don't count.
They might not be seen as a significant voting bloc, so addressing their needs. Maybe not seen as a political priority. What does that tell you about how certain communities can just be sidelined within a city?
So basically ignored because they don't have political clout. It's a disturbing thought.
Precisely. And then there's the government's classification of residents as encroachers. That often serves as a justification for not providing basic services.
How does that logic work?
Well, the thinking, however flawed, can be. If they're on the land illegally, then giving them sanitation, clean water, electricity. That could be seen as legitimizing their unauthorized presence.
Ah, I see.
It creates this vicious cycle where the lack of basic amenities just marginalizes them even further. It's important to think about the real-world impact of these kinds of classifications on vulnerable people.
The podcast also used the term class apartheid, which is, a very strong phrase.
Very strong.
But sadly, based on everything we've heard, it seems kind of fitting. The apparent indifference from the wider city seems directly linked to the fact that this community is geographically isolated, doesn't directly impact the wealthier, more visible parts of Mumbai.
And that raises a crucial point about the spatial segregation in so many cities. The living conditions of marginalized communities can be deliberately overlooked when they're physically and socially distanced from more privileged groups.
Yeah.
It's a situation where, the waste flowing under their homes might come from elsewhere in the city, but the devastating consequences, they're almost exclusively borne by the people in Salnagar.
Right.
It prompts a critical question. How does a city reconcile such stark disparities within its own borders?
And it's a further indictment that even NGOs, who are often on the front lines helping vulnerable communities, are apparently hesitant to fully intervene in Salnagar because it's technically illegal.
That's a crucial observation.
It's a terrible catch-22.
It really is.
Yeah.
Organizations that would normally provide aid face huge legal and logistical hurdles when dealing with settlements that aren't officially recognized. There's a real risk their efforts could be disrupted, or even lead to displacement if they're seen as somehow facilitating an illegal occupation. It highlights the limitations legal frameworks can sometimes impose on humanitarian work.
It's just so important to remember these aren't abstract statistics or some nameless mass. These are individuals with stories, hopes, fears. The podcast shared some incredibly powerful voices from Sathnagar, like the tailor, Parvez. He said so poignantly, "Hum yahan reh kabhi Mumbai mein nahi hain, sirf kam karne ke liye aaye."
Even living here, we're not part of Mumbai, we only exist to work.
Yeah, that statement just cuts right to the core of their marginalization.
It really does. What's so insightful about his words is how they capture that profound sense of alienation. Physically in Mumbai, but not truly part of its social, economic, or civic life.
Right.
Their existence seems reduced just to their labor. Little or no recognition of their basic rights, their humanity, beyond what they contribute economically. It really makes you think about who gets to be a full citizen in the city.
And then there was Kajal, the young woman hoping to become a nurse. She shared something that speaks volumes about their limited options, the fear that just hangs over their lives.
मैं यहाँ से निकालना चाहती हूँ पर मुझे ये जगह छोड़ते हुए भी डर लगता है.
I want to escape this place, but leaving it also scares me.
Yeah.
Kajal's words are so revealing, aren't they? They highlight the complex emotional ties, the deep uncertainties that come with displacement, even when your current situation is as terrible as Saifnagar. It underscores the lack of viable, safe alternatives, the potential disruption to the fragile social networks, the meager livelihoods they've somehow managed to build there. It makes you consider how even a place of such hardship can offer some kind of security when there are no better options. Hearing these personal accounts, it really brings the stark realities down to a deeply human level, doesn't it? It's not just about a floating slum in some abstract way. It's about Parvez, Kajal, countless others just trying to survive, maybe even build a better future against unimaginable odds.
Absolutely.
So, considering all this, what are some potential paths forward? What concrete steps actually need to be taken to address this crisis?
Well, the podcast did outline several critical steps. The first, and maybe the most fundamental, is official recognition by the government.
Just acknowledging they exist.
Acknowledging their existence, yes, and crucially, the rights of the people living there. This official recognition is basically the essential first step for allowing basic services, for enabling aid and support to reach them effectively. Without that, any meaningful progress is going to be incredibly difficult.
And instead of the usual approach, just bulldozing these places and displacing everyone, the idea of in situ rehabilitation seems like a much more humane, maybe more effective approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Upgrading the area where people already live, rather than just forcing them out, potentially losing their jobs, their communities.
In situ rehab, it offers a real chance to minimize that disruption to people's lives, to the existing social structures.
Okay.
By investing in essential infrastructure within the settlement, like building more stable housing, providing proper sanitation, ensuring clean water, you could create more livable, healthier conditions without the trauma of forced displacement. It respects the existing community, tries to improve their lives right where they are.
Basic sanitation just seems so fundamental. Providing mobile toilets, setting up clean water tanks, regular garbage collection. That feels like the absolute minimum that should happen immediately.
Agreed.
And of course, regular, accessible health camps. Desperately needed.
Absolutely. These basic public health interventions could have a huge immediate impact on people's well-being, significantly cutting down waterborne diseases, improving general health, especially for the kids there. These aren't minor tweaks, they're essential for basic human dignity and health.
And the podcast rightly stressed how crucial it is to amplify the voices of the residents themselves. Through responsible media coverage, thorough reporting.
Yes.
The more people know about this, the harder it surely becomes for authorities, for the wider public, to keep ignoring it.
Amplifying those individual stories is critical for raising public awareness, challenging that narrative of illegal encroachers, and ultimately putting pressure on the authorities to take real, sustainable action. Media attention can play a vital role in humanizing the residents of Safe Nagar, fostering empathy, maybe a sense of shared responsibility among the broader population. Understanding the power of these narratives is key to seeing how change might happen.
The podcast finished with a really powerful quote from Arundhati Roy. "There's no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately unheard."
That really hits home, doesn't it?
It really resonates with everything we've discussed about Safe Nagar.
It perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of the situation. The residents there, they aren't passive, voiceless victims. They have incredible resilience, ingenuity, a clear understanding of their own situation. Their voices, their stories, they're just not being heard. Or, more accurately, they're being deliberately ignored by those with power. It should make us all reflect on who gets heard and who is systematically silenced in our society.
They are not just passively existing in this horrific environment, they are actively surviving. With incredible courage, determination, they deserve basic human dignity, not just this precarious existence floating over raw sewage.
In Gavandi, in this context, it serves as this stark, deeply troubling reminder of the entrenched inequalities that persist in our cities. It's not just some isolated slum tucked away. It's a powerful symptom of much bigger societal issues. Poverty, migration, basic social justice. It should raise uncomfortable questions for all of us about the very fabric of our cities and societies.
So as you've listened to this deep dive, I really want you to consider your own potential role, even if it's unintentional, in overlooking critical issues like this. Think deeply about what it truly means to be part of a city, part of a society, when such stark, dehumanizing realities exist right within it. What responsibility, if any, do we all bear to acknowledge and address these kinds of injustices?
This situation in Safe Nagar, it really presents a challenge to our collective conscience. It forces us to confront how willing we are to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about deep-seated inequality, about the marginalization of vulnerable communities right in our own urban landscapes. It's really a call to think critically about our own assumptions, our own awareness.
Thank you for taking this deep dive into the realities of Safe Nagar with us. If this exploration has resonated with you, please consider sharing this information widely. Demand more action from those in power. These aren't just distant stories, they are urgent calls for change that truly deserve to be heard.